Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Nicholas Hudson, and I have the privilege of serving as the director of the Office of International, excuse me, not International, but the Office of Student Orientation, Leadership, and Engagement. And welcome to the International Leadership Series for 2020-2021. We are doing so in a virtual format this year. This year, we are focusing on our theme, which is the personal is political, social justice and equity for all. The International Leadership Series is sponsored by the Office of Student Orientation, Leadership and Engagement, as well as the Office of International Engagement. Both of our offices are located in the Student Center. Feel free to stop by if you would like and follow us on the socials, right? That's the important part. As we move through here, just a couple of housekeeping things as we move through the beginning portion of our presentation today. The International Leadership Series is based off of the Oxfam's Elements of Global Citizenship. Each year, we have a theme related to these elements of global citizenship. Last year, we focused on sustainable development. All of our speakers focused on that. This year, we're focusing on social justice and equity. Once again, these are all elements that Oxfam has determined makes up a global citizen. Next year, we'll be focusing on human rights. The year after that, peace and conflict, then identity and diversity, power and governance, and globalization and interdependence. In order for you to be a better global citizen, Oxfam says that you have to have these 7 components of it. So this year, once again, all of our speakers for the International Leadership Series will be focused on social justice and equity. And we find that this year to be apropos. We had selected this back in April before really any of the larger social justice and equity movements had started here in the United States and around the world as we move through that. And so just be mindful of that. This is one of 6 series. This is the first series that we will be, or first lecture in the series that we'll be having this year, excuse me. And this year, in order to be an International Leadership Fellow, we are inviting folks to do that. If you are in attendance today, you need to just attend 4 more workshop or series, speaker series throughout the course of the year, as well as participate in the Art of Social Change event in spring 2021. You will produce an art piece. And art can take shape in many forms. It can be a dance piece. It could be a sculpture, a painting, a drawing, a poem, maybe makeup, things of that nature. And there'll be additional instructions as we move through there, but you will need to do that in order to become an International Leadership Fellow. International Leadership Fellows are recognized at the Emerging Leader Celebration, as well as receiving an International Leaders Medal. Not only that, though, is that it fulfills the global perspective leadership stage of the Trailblazers. So you can fulfill a lot of our capacities here in that area. So those are just some basic housekeepings as we move out of the way here. We will leave time for questions at the end. We have muted everyone as they move through. Please make sure, though, you have your sound on this will be not just me lecturing throughout, but we'll also have video that's in part of this. So today, our first lecture is being offered by me. And this lecture is entitled Pop Justice, the intersection of social justice, leadership, and pop culture or popular culture. A small little plug. For those of you who are freshmen that may be in attendance this year, I will be teaching an entire course on this through University College for the freshman seminars that we have in the spring semester. And so if you find this to be interesting and fascinating as I do, feel free to sign up for that class. But what do we mean by pop justice and what does this mean? And we're going to really focus in on what's happened over the course of the last, I would say, 6 months in the United States and around the world. To start us off, though, we're going to look a little bit into this concept of pop justice, of popular culture intersecting with social justice.
Breonna Taylor was a 26-year-old EMT serving on the front lines of the fight against COVID when she was shot at least 8 times inside her home.
Police say they were looking for drugs, but none were found in the apartment. Drug dealer they were investigating had already been arrested that day.
Local police have released a nearly blank incident report stemming from the night Breonna Taylor was fatally shot in her own apartment by police, despite the fact that a 26-year-old EMT was shot at least 8 times during the no-knock search in March. Yesterday's report listed Taylor's injuries as none.
America is seeing what the Black community has known for a very long time, that police are aggressors, that their culture, their policies, and their practices lead to the harm of American citizens, and that it is now time for us to do something drastically. What we're seeing right now is an overly aggressive policing that is happening in this country. And what we're saying is it's time for us to think about something different.
So tonight, I want to dive right in by focusing directly on who gathered us together and galvanizing it into a nation, and that is Breonna Taylor.
We want people in leadership to just step up and just do what's right.
Breonna cannot have passed away, cannot be murdered, cannot have died in vain.
We're uplifting really comprehensive demands in this moment in defense of Black lives.
These dangerous, unnecessary raids kill and injure thousands of people every year.
Unless we end no-knock raids, the next Breonna Taylor is right around the corner. Never again.
The city of Louisville, Kentucky tonight banning the use of controversial no-knock police warrants. City Council unanimously voted to approve Breonna's law.
As you can see, the intersection of leadership, social justice, and pop culture is taking place all throughout the United States at the moment. And I think in order for us to really comprehend what is happening in this concept of pop justice, we really need to take a step back and understand some of the key concepts at play here. So when we talk about social justice, what does that actually mean? Well, it means the inclusion of everyone in the full benefits of society. It also means the empowerment of people to participate fully in the economic, social, and cultural life of the country. Justice is truth in action. In order for justice to happen, action needs to take place. What do we mean by leadership when we talk about this intersection of leadership? Well, I tend to believe the simplest form leadership is the ability of leaders to mobilize others to get extraordinary things done. But it also has at the crux of it change, as change is the ultimate goal of the creative process of leadership. Effective leaders are those who are able to create and affect positive change on the behalf of others and society. You can be a leader and affect no change. Most of the time, that's called management. Leaders work to get things done. And so when we think about it, there is no act too small nor too bold. The history of social change is the history of millions of actions, both small and large, coming together at critical points to create a power that governments cannot suppress. And finally, when we talk about pop culture, I think this is where we get a little challenged with it. Pop culture is modern popular culture transmitted via the mass media and aimed predominantly at younger folk. It is the set of practices, beliefs, and objects that are dominant or relevant in a society at a given point in time. It can encompass activities and feelings related to said objects. So I want us to think about this quote that's on our screen now. Pop culture, it is said by John Podhoretz, is a reflection of social change, not a cause of social change. I want us to think about that as we look through our own minds and brains. Has pop culture been a result of social change, or has it actually led the social change at a larger community? And why do I bring that up? Because our friends who created this concept of pop justice actually argue that pop culture, celebrities, sports athletes, social media, music actually are the ones that are leading the way as it relates to social change. In 2018, excuse me, 2016, our friends at Liz Mann Strategy created what is known as the hashtag Pop Justice Volume Series, which is very extensive in detailing the ways in which the entertainment industry, and just pop culture in general can have an effect and have had an effect on the larger U.S. and international societies, and how they can have an effect moving forward in the future around issues related to social justice. And so when we think about it, this concept of pop justice can really impact what we're doing here. So when we think about pop culture, it is like an injection of high octane fuel in the engine of public discourse about institutional racism, gender identity, immigration, pay equity, and other issues of social justice. Art and culture have been forces for social and political change for centuries, but in a hyper-connected world where practically anyone, anywhere, can join in on the conversation, just like you all right now, pop culture is changing and influencing public opinion at a rate never seen before. This velocity makes this an exciting and incredibly promising moment for all of us who do work for a more just and equitable society. Pop justice uses pop culture strategies to achieve goals in social change, philanthropy, and execution. It is informed by decades of practice, investment, and thinking at the nexus of art, culture, media, and social change. Historically, the philanthropic sector and the pop culture, the philanthropic sector and social change advocates have really worked at a part, right? And they have underinvested their time and effort in entertainment and pop culture interventions as a strategy to create change. This underinvestment of time and resources has in part fueled the perception that philanthropy has limited ability to change the highly resourced entertainment industry, and because the field is nascent, investments are being made in other areas. We know that that's not the case. We know that through the investment of time, effort, resources, that the media industry, entertainment industry really can affect large-scale positive change. We see that through folks such as Beyonce. So we're going to watch a little video that talks a little bit about this concept of pop justice. If it plays. Play. Well, wouldn't you know, it's not wanting to play on my screen. All right, well, we're going to move forward. I'm going to try to figure out why that's not there. And we'll maybe come back to that a little bit. But what is pop culture? What does it mean here? Pop culture really tends to be related to large audiences. It relates to entertainment and pastime and practices. If it's, and this is in the top right corner of this graph, or left corner of this graph here, it also is evolving. So is it stagnant, right, or fixed? And so some of our pastimes like bowling and football and baseball, those are stagnant, meaning they're rarely changing the rules. I mean, sometimes in football they change the rules a lot, but they're rarely changing the rules. What they're doing, though, is the players are changing themselves. And so there is a dynamic culture and ever-evolving content and entertainment. If it's a small audience, bottom left corner number 3, and it's constantly changing, that's when we get folks that are the indies or the elites. Folks that are like, I know this niche group artist of things I've never heard of, right? So it's changing, but not many folks know about it. And then if it's fixed and not many folks actually know about it, it's traditional, right? So this concept of pop justice and these reports written by the Liz Mann strategy actually said that there are numerous players inside of the pop justice movement. Those are artists, advocates, philanthropy, connectors, evaluators, and industry. All of them do work together to actually create large-scale social change, as we are going to be witness to as we move through the course of this lecture. And one of the things that they argue is that the small amount of work at this intersection between these 6 players, as well as leadership in general, is making waves. Advocates, both inside and outside of the entertainment industry, who have worked for years, are now seeing substantive results that harness the power of pop culture for social change. Not only is there evidence to suggest that the investment in this intersection is both strategic and essential for large-scale social impact, but it is also particularly timely as entertainment platforms become more diversified and accessible and pluralistic, right? So when we get to this concept, we want to look at it. So what do they say, and what do we say as it relates to pop culture? So there's a lot of pop justice, excuse me. There's a lot of inputs, values, folks' knowledge, our appetite. Are we risk averse? Then there's the outputs. What can we do? What type of activities? The players that we just discussed and the different stages. And then what are we actually trying to achieve? Whether it's awareness, knowledge, are we trying to change behaviors, perceptions, practices? Are we trying to shift the US's larger norms, things of that nature? Are we trying to issue policy and social change? Are we trying to actually change the physical conditions that we're living in? Right now, when we think about climate change, we're actually trying to change a lot of the physical and social conditions that exist. Instead of having 550,000 people lose power in Pensacola, Florida overnight because of the hurricane that just hit there and the mass flooding, we've already gone through almost all the alphabetical letters for named hurricanes this season, and we still have 2 months left. This is probably going to be one of the most destructive hurricane seasons that we've ever had. And so this concept of climate change, that is part of pop justice. This idea of trying to ensure that we have a society that is equitable across the board for everyone, regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity or expression, racial or ethnic backgrounds. The list goes on and on, is there. And so I really think that as we move forward, we're noticing that this idea and this concept of diversity, or the lack thereof of diversity, both on screen, off screen, behind the scenes, in this concept of racial justice is going to be continuing to dominate headlines and does not appear to be losing steam. This concept of global, of climate change, but global efforts to combat climate change are not going to be ceasing, right? And so you're going to notice that these things are going to be much more in your face. These concepts of equity and justice are going to be there as we move forward throughout society. And how does this actually show up in our world, right? And so let's take a look here. Predominantly, TAMU and Laredo is a Hispanic community. And how do Hispanics or Latinos actually show up in TV or film? Well, for the most part, very often, these are surveys that were done, for the most part, folks say that Latinos show up as the criminals, right? They show up very often as the criminals, the gardeners, the maids, right? Very rarely are they, or never are they, the lawyers, the judges, the teachers, right? You know, they're not portrayed this way in TV. And then that then leads to a negative stereotype as it relates to Latinos and Hispanics, right? Many folks, because of the negative stereotypes and the negative roles that folks, that Latinos have on television, they say that somewhat, very often, they don't keep up their homes, or that they take away jobs from Americans, or that they have too many children, right? We're seeing these things because that's how folks actually ultimately view us, because of the negative perceptions that they're seeing on television, right? Or the words being spewed out of the mouth of our politicians. But that's not what this conversation's about, right? We're talking about the negative perceptions on television and film, in other pop culture venues, and then how that leads to a negative stereotype as it relates to other populations. And so if we continue to normalize, and that's really what this concept of pop justice is, if we continue to normalize different backgrounds, ethnicities on mainstream television and entertainment, we're going to be able to really change folks' perception. But that's only the first part of the battle. Then celebrities and other entertainment industry personnel have to utilize their capacity, right? Their leadership capacity to initiate large-scale change on a social level, on a societal level. So that's what we have here. So how is that done? How do folks get really into this concept of pop justice? Like, how can we really, as a celebrity or an entertainer or things of that nature, how do they actually say, like, you know what, I'm actually gonna decide to take a stand? A lot of it's driven from their values. So what I would love for you all to do really is to think about what values drive you, right? Because a lot of our folks that are in the entertainment industry actually are thinking about their values on a constant day-to-day basis. And in our leadership programs here at TAMU, we often preach that folks follow their values. And so if you are unable to name your top 5 values, I think we have a challenge here. So my top 5 values are as follows: equity, justice, collaboration, purpose, and empowerment. And if you don't know those and are not living those values on an everyday basis, I think you are going to have a more difficult time initiating the social change that you want to. We really operate from the social change model of leadership here at TAMU in many of our aspects, right? We have an obligation to understand our own individual values, how we then interplay with groups, and then how do we actually want to interact with society? And understanding those values, and at the core of all of those, is how we're going to initiate change. So what are some of the topics? Let's actually get our chat here, because I love to see how this is going to work. Let's see. What are some of your values that you all are interested in? Or not? What are some of your passion issues that you're actually interested in? So as we go through here, I can think of a couple. So like, type it in the chat here. What are issues that you are passionate about? Because celebrities and entertainers know exactly what they're passionate about. And so I would, let's see what you're passionate about here as we move forward. I'm not seeing anyone want to type what they're passionate about. Uh-oh. Okay, so we have some helping others in need, but I want you to be more specific. So that's too broad, right? Celebrities say, I want to help everyone that's in need. No, they have causes, issues. LGBT inclusion, the environment, equality, still too broad, right? Helping immigrants, I'm loving this. Yes, right? So those more specific things that you have, the better off we're going to be. And so here we go. It could be racial equity that you're interested in and you're passionate about. It could be sexual assault prevention, reproductive rights, gun safety, right? I think that's a big one, especially for our youth right now that have grown up with active school shooting drills, right? Active shooter drills. I think that's kind of there. Thank you, Alan, for sharing that there. LGBTQ rights, right? Those are things that you could be passionate about. What about criminal justice reform, right? Our criminal justice system is really, if you've never watched the 13th, the documentary on by Ava DuVernay on Netflix, you should, because our criminal justice system is absolutely putting our minoritized populations at risk and, in fact, perpetuating a lot of inequities that exist in our country. Climate justice, right? And so we know Greta Thunberg and a lot of the movement for climate justice is out there. So you can be passionate about that. I don't know about you, but we're all in college, and I'm sure you all are here. Maybe college, free college for all could be a passionate cause that you're there with. Abortion rights, and that would fall under reproductive rights. Immigration reform could be another one. And then finally, economic freedom, right? So when we think about economic freedom, it could be the fight for $15 minimum wage, because right now, minimum wage is $7.25, if I'm not mistaken, and it has taken almost 20 years for it to increase. And so there's a lot more issues that you could have, but a lot of celebrities and those in the entertainment industry latch on to these, make sure that their values that we just talked about align with their passion issues, right? The causes that they believe in. A lot of folks believe in animal rights, right? And ensuring the protection of animals or other things. So these are just some ideas. What are your passionate issues? Because that's actually going to play out in a lot of this pop justice that we're talking about here. But also it requires activism, right? So it requires, once again, action. What is activism? Activism is a policy or action of using vigorous campaigning to bring about political or social change. It is a doctrine or practice that emphasizes direct, vigorous action, especially in support of or in opposition to one side of a controversial issue. Activism is key in many efforts that we have to do. There are varying forms of activism. There is direct activism and indirect activism. Direct activism is overt political acts of protest that often involve the physical body as a vehicle for protest, including walkouts or protests or sit-ins or wearing political clothing. As you see here, I can't breathe. Indirect forms of activism are those that express critical concerns who do not physically challenge or public institutions. So indirect activism would be this concept of slacktivism, sharing things on the internet, right? Sharing social media thoughts. You're not physically challenging. You're not using your body as politics. Adrian? Okay. All right. So what other forms of activism are there? There's both internal resistance and external resistance, right? There's this concept of internal resistance. You conform to institutional cultural norms and expectations, but you engage in critique of oppression. So what does that mean? You follow the rules. You're a rule follower, right? You're not out there trying to go against the system, right? You are following expectations. So you will set up a meeting with a congressperson. You will express your dismay towards the said bill. You will write a letter to the editor. You will discuss things with your peers. You'll hold a petitioning event, but you will make sure that you submitted the event on Trailblazers, for example, to do that. External resistance are those that involve overt types of behavior, and that behavior then does not conform to institutional or cultural norms and expectations. Now, here in Laredo, and in TAMU, a lot of our expectations are that as young folk, y'all are going to listen to the elders, and we're going to defer to them their capacity to make decisions on our end. That's what I've often seen here, and in fact, that takes place in our political process here in the city of Laredo, and really in this area, Webb County around here. But many young folks are realizing that, hey, that's actually not the way it works. My voice matters. Just like celebrities are saying, my voice matters as well. And so there's this idea of external resistance where we're going to break against those cultural norms. I'm going to stand up for my beliefs. I'm going to go march on behalf of Black Lives Matter. Here in the city of Laredo, that's 96% Latino. You know, almost all of the people that participated in the Black Lives Matter marches, both in May and in June, throughout numerous days, they were almost all young folk, and they were going against the cultural norms and expectations of the city of this size, right? We often think of Laredo being its own little isolated bubble, but our students are realizing, and young folk are realizing, that there's so much more that goes on in this world. So what are forms of activism? And I'm sure we've seen those before. They're protests. Just as I said, there's protests. There's boycotts. You can say, I'm never going to buy a product from Goya again because Goya supports X, Y, and Z politician. There's hip hop. Hip hop was created in the 70s and 80s in its the nexus as a form of resistance to the systems that exist throughout the United States, as a critique of the police state that exists here, but also just a societal critique at large. Poetry, slam poetry, things of that nature. Slacktivism, every time you share a meme or your thoughts as it relates to a topic, every time you put hashtag Black Lives Matter or hashtag say her name, you are participating in slacktivism. Sit-ins, right? Saying we're going to occupy this space, just as they did in the 1950s and 60s at the lunch counters and Woolworths and other places throughout the South, to ensure that Black folk had the opportunity to be equals, or even Mexican Americans had the ability to be equals across the board. Every time you wear a piece of clothing that critiques things, so you could wear something that says, I can't breathe, for example, on your face mask, things of that nature. The murals that you have seen throughout the course of this presentation here, the signs that we've seen, all of those are forms of activism. But there's other forms of activisms that our friends, celebrities, that I'm hopeful Beyonce is able to show us here as we go through. Let's take a look.
Beyonce's Super Bowl halftime performance is drawing praise from her fans and consternation from critics. Beyonce's dancers donned berets, sported afros, and wore all black, similar to the style of the Black Panther Party. In addition, Beyonce and her dancers raised a fist to the sky, reminiscent of the Black Power salutes of the 1960s and 70s. Melina Abdullah is a Black Lives Matter activist and leader in California. She said it's wonderful that artists like Beyonce are willing to raise social consciousness and use their artistry to advance social justice. But Republican Congressman Peter King of New York immediately condemned Beyonce for her performance. He said on Facebook, her pro-Black Panther and anti-cop video formation and her Super Bowl appearance is just one more example of how acceptable it has become to be anti-police.
We'll watch another video about other celebrities, not just Beyonce, right? But we'll watch another video about celebrities and their forms of activism as they've been taking place here over the last 4 or 5 years as it relates to this concept of pop justice, right? The intersection of understanding my values, right? My personal causes that I have, and then I'm going to take action towards it. And that's really what pop justice is.
Let's kick things off with the Hollywood Wrap.
If they get away with this now, what's going to happen later?
Jamie Foxx has been on the front line of the protests to end racism.
You don't know what you went to down here in Alabama? And you guilty. from the moment you're born.
Now Jamie's film Just Mercy is available for everyone to watch at home. Warner Brothers announcing the movie about civil rights attorney Brian Stevenson can now be rented for free on most streaming and on-demand platforms through the month of June. Meanwhile, the BET network continues to provide special programming all month about the fight for justice. That includes a forum for the presidential candidates. It's scheduled to take place June 19th, which is also known as Juneteenth, the date celebrated annually to mark the end of slavery.
The last day of February, which means it's also the last day of Black History Month, here to reflect on what that means to him is our very own Chris Redd.
Chris Redd is known for making us laugh on SNL, but now he wants to make sure everyone stays safe. Chris is concerned people may become infected now that we're 2 weeks from when the mass demonstrations began. For more information on how to donate, head to celebritypage.com.
Please don't make it hard to know if we should believe the things that we see.
June is Pride Month, but most events like this one from 2019 are canceled due to the pandemic. Now Hollywood is getting creative to mark 50 years since the first Pride March. Billy Porter, Janelle Monáe, and Carson Kressley are among those taking part in a virtual march June 28th in New York City. LA will host their virtual Pride event June 13th and Chicago on June 28th. Many of the events will be broadcast on local ABC TV stations. And that's today's Hollywood Wrap.
Thanks so much for stopping by. Hit the subscribe button to stay in the loop on the latest celebrity and entertainment news. Check out celebritypage.com for more Hollywood headlines.
So when we talk about this, we can see that our celebrities, the entertainment industry, actually can achieve a lot of change as it relates to this. And so when we think about this, there are a lot of younger viewers who view diversity, either racial, religious, sexual, as part of their world, right? It is what it is, right? This audience wants authenticity, and advertisers want you, the young audience. So whatever media that you're streaming, the advertisers are actually going to actively seek you out because they know that you're also a highly sought after demographic. So shows such as Empire, Jane the Virgin, The Mindy Project, Scandal, Grey's Anatomy, which comes back for season 17, Master of None, and Orange is the New Black are only a few examples of popular TV shows with diverse casts and complex cultural narratives that reflect the richness of communities in the United States today. That is why you're seeing more and more TV shows and videos and movies and video games that are really reflecting the overall United States kind of the way it looks. No longer is it just a white old men dominating the TV, right? And so these changes are a result of the advocacy networks such as the National Hispanic Media Coalition, Asian Americans Advancing Justice, American Indians in Film and Television, the NAACP and GLAAD, to name a few, that have been working tirelessly to successfully increase representation and new narratives on the small screen. These efforts are gaining the traction they deserve, and the time is ripe to deepen and expand the strategies and partnerships across creatives, advocates, and industry institutions. So the watershed win of legalized same-sex marriage in couples for federal law really can play its role and get its nexus from pop culture itself. If we really think about it, do we think the United States Supreme Court would have granted same-sex marriage if pop culture wasn't and the cultural needle hadn't moved to a majority of United States folks actually accepting that? And so the answer is no, most likely it wouldn't. LGBT right advocates can conclusively draw ties between the appearance of television shows like Will and Grace and Modern Family to changing the cultural and political climate around the acceptance of LGBT folk. And even now we're seeing LGBT folk, BIPOC folks, right? So Black, Indigenous, people of color through, for example, Love Victor on Hulu. We're seeing much more of these conversations as it relates to it. So it wasn't just a primarily white thing. Now it's related to other things. We're seeing a ginormous change as it relates to this as we move forward. So how are our celebrities using, and what entertainment platforms are they using to make these large scale changes, right? So we know that they use entertainment platforms to do changes in our society, right? And so when we think about it, how are they doing it? So let's take a look here. We have film and television. We know that film and television is one of the largest industries in the United States. And it's pretty unique to the United States, the level of impact that it has on our overall economy and the amount of impact that it has, right? For example, ABC, which owns Disney, Disney, which owns ABC and other venues, ESPN and other things, is one of the largest studios in the world, and they make a lot of change here. And so how has the TV and film really impacted our perception, societal perceptions, right? So we look at Just Mercy, right, that we saw earlier with Jamie Foxx and Michael B. Jordan. They really focus on and chronicles the experience of real life experience of Brian Stevenson, who is a lawyer. And so it's a really interesting dynamic that's there. But Warner Brothers gave it out for free, right? They said, we're going to not collect profits. We want to help educate society. Hulu created, which is owned by Disney, created Love, Victor, which is a follow-up to the Love, Simon movie, but this focuses in on a young Latino man as he figures out his sexual orientation, which is opening up conversations related to sexual orientation in the Latinx and Hispanic communities. We're seeing One Day at a Time, now on Pop TV, but originally on Netflix, really change the dynamic of what it means to be a single Latina mother, and what it means to be a Latino family on television. Same thing goes with Blackish, right? Redefining what it means to be a family of color, right? The Hate You Give really, which was a literary book, which was then transformed into TV, really chronicles the life of young folks and police brutality and protesting that's there. But really, our fellow native Texan, Matthew McConaughey, really tried to bring up a lot of issues related to social justice in the Dallas Buyers Club, related to being more accepting of transgender and trans folks in general. And so I think that's an important concept, that it's not just race related, that it's also sexual orientation or gender identity, things of that nature. So then we also have here music. And music has historically led a lot of changes throughout time. So we have Childish Gambino with This Is America, a critique on the current United States race relations that exist throughout there. We have J. Cole, who is out there protesting Black Lives Matter in the United States, in Los Angeles. We have Bad Bunny, who is really transforming the way gender and identity expression takes place, right? I think within the Latin community, Latinx, Hispanic community. And so I think that these are all just an interesting concept of how musicians and their music are actually moving us and moving the needle and moving the dial as it relates to either gender identity expression or race relations in the United States. Here we have publishing, right? So how does the publishing industry change it? So I Am Malala is a narrative, the lived history of Malala Yousafzai, and a very popular book, and it really talks about the gender equity as it relates to education throughout the United States. Many, many Americans have read this book. It is a bestseller. And college students throughout the country also have read this book. And so it changes our perception of what we believe should be equitable, right? And so these are how we are changed. Trevor Noah, who is the host of The Daily Show, his very, very popular book, Born a Crime, is changing narratives as it relates to being lived experiences living through apartheid, right, in South Africa. It's an absolutely fascinating book if you have not read it. The Audible account is even better. How do folks use their celebrity status to issue change, right? Well, we see that all the time. Look at here, Leonardo DiCaprio out there protesting no Doppel in protest of climate change. He's a climate justice advocate, but he's also working with and for Indigenous peoples throughout the United States. We see WNBA basketball stars throughout the country protesting on behalf of Black Lives Matter and police brutality. We saw, in fact, the NBA in almost all sports, because of the usage of athletes utilizing their power to say, we are not going to play, that our athletics were closed down here about a month ago, a little less than a month ago. And they paused the playoffs through the NBA and the WNBA and other aspects of that. We see real, true change being initiated, where now NBA and WNBA owners are utilizing their sports complex to have people register to vote and then to serve as voting structures for folks to go to. It's a big space, right? So we know that they can host more people and serve as voting locations. Such a unique thing, including this weekend. We see Colin Kaepernick, who has really given up his entire professional career in the NFL for fighting for what he believes in. And we're going to see a little bit about him as well as we move forward. But we see folks utilizing their celebrity on a day-to-day basis. We see Meghan Markle make comments in a video as it relates to Black Lives Matter here in the United States, where they now call their home, the Duchess of Sussex. We see our social media friends, our celebrities on social media all the time, bringing awareness to and calling for action related to it. So who do we have here? We have Halsey, we have Harry Styles and Ariana Grande giving their thoughts and using their body as politic, right? They are out there protesting with the folk. I have questions for you all. If our celebrities are out there fighting for what they believe in, why aren't you? Here we have Taylor Swift, Lady Gaga, and Chrissy Teigen, some of the world's most followed celebrities, issuing statements and comments and calls to action to their followers, right? Lady Gaga has 44 million followers on Instagram. That's a lot of followers, right? And so think about that collective impact that she and others have. And then Kim Kardashian, the winner of followers on, I think it's Instagram, with 190 million followers, issues comments and statements and calls to action about Black Lives Matter, George Floyd, and Breonna Taylor, using their celebrity through their social media platforms to do it. Video games are actually another component where we can see large-scale social change being issued. Two examples are inside the Haiti earthquake and Half the Sky movement. These are video games that really try to expose folks to, in first player, third player type things, to go ahead and issue some changes there. Our comic books, the things that we read, as well as graphic novels, are changing the dynamic and changing the narrative. The Magnificent Miss Marvel is a Muslim woman, Muslim American woman, going out there and making change. America Chavez is a Latina, queer Latina, actually issuing, has her own storyline in the Marvel universe. Interesting. We're seeing advertisers utilize celebrities and their own businesses to call for social change, whether it's Target or Colin Kaepernick and Nike. Nike, one of their most famous ads that they just did, if I'm not mistaken, earlier this year, that they had here. So these are different forms that we see pop justice taking place in the United States and around the world. I focus specifically here in the United States, but we know that protests related to Black Lives Matter have taken place all across the globe, whether it was in and some of the photos that I've used today were protests that they took place in England, France, Germany, Australia for Black Lives Matter. This is not just a United States concept. And so how do we utilize our own capacity to call for large-scale change? That's ultimately what we're trying to do here through the International Leadership Series this year, is to call to action, trying to get our folks to build a more equitable and just society for all. So that is what I have here. My hope is that you go out there and do something great. I'm going to open it up to questions now in the last 9 minutes that we have together. And I'm hopeful there's questions. If not, and I'm going to ask that you turn your screen on and actually talk to me, please.
Hello?
Yes, who is this?
Anna.
Hi, Anna.
Do you think creating a podcast can be a good idea to start making a change?
Absolutely. And so if you think about it, media, a podcast is just like music, right? And so thank you very much for your question. A podcast is very much like music, and you have the ability to issue change through that, right? And so it's something that people subscribe to. And in fact, more and more Americans today are actually subscribing to podcasts. And so they like small bits of information. Americans' attention span has really shrunk considerably, especially Gen Z and millennials, where we want invitable things. For those that want attendance, click on that sheet. That's how you get attendance for today. I hope that's not the only reason why we're here today, though. I'm hopeful that we are able to inspire you to do something a little bit larger than yourself and participate in this, utilizing some of the techniques that our entertainment industry has done. And there's, once again, if you are a freshman, a signature course I'll be teaching this spring will be entitled hashtag Pop Justice and Woke Culture, the intersection of social justice, leadership, and popular culture. And we're going to focus on this through the reading of Just Mercy, as well as the investigation of different medias and media platforms that we have across the board. What other questions do we have, my friends? We have a little bit.
I have a question.
Yes, who is this?
Brianna.
Hi, Brianna.
Hello. Okay, so my question is, in a place like Laredo, TAMU in general, I know that we had a discussion on this. How do we get our students involved in things like this, especially like our minority groups, since I think they're already so underrepresented, so hard for them to want to. And coming from me, who always wants representation and equality and equity, how do we get our people to be more involved on campus? Because campus doesn't really promote anything in that nature, especially now that it's so widely. It's not a trend. It's not, but we're looking at it so much more now. And the message that TAMU puts out is kind of not like, it's not good. We had literally one email from the president. We had one day off to memorialize George Floyd. How do we do more?
Yeah, so Brianna, I think that's a great question. And I think there's not an easy fix, right? So it kind of goes along with folks' interest, right? You know, when I look across the board, I have 55 people here today, which is phenomenal for an International Leadership Series session. And I think more and more of our folks are actually becoming engaged in not only the political process, so we have that, but they're becoming much more aware of these social issues that are existing. And they're not tolerating it. But the traditional ways that students have and folks have traditionally done things of protests or sit-ins or raising awareness through those things aren't actually what Generation Z is all about, right? So we have to find different ways for Gen Z to actually advocate, whether it's sharing on social media. I mean, you know, and not letting the foot off the pedal. It shouldn't just be our Black friends that are the ones advocating for a more equitable campus here. It requires allies and other folks. There are programs that are geared towards teaching advocacy skills, right? So there's Leadership TAMU, there's the sophomore leaders involved in change, there's the International Leadership Series that we'll be talking about this throughout the rest of the year. Our next topic will be focusing on LGBT issues. And then the time after that, we'll be focusing on, we'll be bringing a guest speaker from the Innocence Project, which works to overturn, works for criminal justice reform and overturning convictions of wrongfully convicted, specifically African-American men in the criminal justice system. But there's those conversations that can take place, but ultimately we have to have the ganas, or the desire to do something. And I think that's ultimately where we can't do it, right? So I would recommend finding like-minded individuals and just going full throttle and never letting up. And that may be exhausting, and I acknowledge that, but utilize the allies that aren't necessarily experiencing some of those inequities that exist to actually be the catalyst for it. But we have to try to get folks there, right? And I think that's the challenge. And I think ultimately, though, putting pressure to diversify TAMU at a larger rate would absolutely make a difference, right? Instead of being a 95% institution, could we be a 90% institution and maybe have more folks from either Asian or African-American or Indigenous backgrounds? That way we do have a more representative population that exists here. Is it great the way it is? No, it's not. And I think we can acknowledge that. We can learn from diversity of experiences and lived histories and thought processes. The U.S. Supreme Court has actually said that it is super important to do that. That's one of the reasons why they support affirmative action. And the affirmative action plans, such as University of Texas's top 5% program, where they already have that in place. If you're in the top 5% of your graduating high school, you are allowed to go to any University of Texas, or really any school in the state of Texas. But if you're not, then they have different affirmative action, not quotas, but initiatives put into place, because diversity is key in building a better university experience, but also expanding one's mind. Thank you, Brianna. That is all the time for questions that I have today. I do greatly appreciate it, you all, for coming in and having this conversation as it relates to pop justice, right? Pop justice is utilizing pop culture, entertainment, industry, but also pop culture in general to initiate large-scale change. We have capacity with pop culture. We are the ones as young folks that they get to determine what is on the top 40 radio stations, what is being played here at the movie theaters, right? Because we are the ones that are spending our money on those things. Pop culture is very responsive to our economic interests. If we say we're not going to go and watch some show that doesn't represent America in the way that we want to, the advertisers will flee. Right? And that's one way to do that. The advertisers flee. A lot of conservative folks, and their comments are related to social justice, as it related to their comments on Fox News and others because of this. So anyway, I greatly appreciate everyone's time here, and hopeful that you stay with us throughout the rest of this year. I will say that in February, our speaker will be on immigration. We'll have immigration reform advocates and a panel on immigration reform. And in March, we're going to focus on women's issues, women's topics, women's rights, women's and gender equity. And then finally, in April, we're going to be focusing on education rights. And so that's a preview of what we have for the year. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact us. And then finally, please go ahead and last call for attendance. It is in the chat bot. Failure to turn that in means you will not get credit once again. If you have attendance here and you can go ahead and come to the Soul office to get your $10 voucher for food that will be available through November. Anyway, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact our office. Thank you very much for coming in today.